It is Friday, September 10th here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to our Week 1 DraftKings podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, is Jared Smola. And this season, we are welcoming in a brand new co-host from Team Riser Fall, Mitch Carl. Welcome to the DFS pod family, Mitch.
It feels good. I appreciate you all having me here. And I think we're going to help all the listeners and viewers win some serious money this year, at least be in a good spot to make some improvements in their game and take the step forward. So thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to this.
I'm hoping that you can help me improve my game, but we'll get to more from Mitch in a minute. First, let me tell you that this podcast is sponsored by our partners at Fanshare Sports. Fanshare curates hundreds of pieces of daily fantasy sports-related articles, tweets, and podcasts to create the most accurate ownership projections in the industry. Those projections can be found in the lineup generator on DraftSharks.com, and you can find up-to-date ownership info anytime at FanshareSports.com. So, Mitch, before we get to our player picks, tell us a little bit about your DFS background, how long you've been playing these games.
Yeah, so it's been quite a while. I've had an interesting journey. I started all the way back in 2013. Didn't start taking it seriously until about 3 years ago, and it's just kind of escalated to where I am now. It was initially just a writing assignment that I was like, yeah, I think I kind of want to write about some fantasy sports. I like this stuff. And, and now we've got the website over there, teamriserfall.com. So it's all things DFS 24/7, 365. And it's my life now, Matt. So I'm excited to be here and talk DFS. It's something I'm passionate about, and hopefully it shows on screen tonight and I'm able to help everyone out and at least not send them down the wrong path. So
that's right. That's what I'm here for, is to make jokes and send people down the wrong path. So let's start getting to those paths, and we'll start at QB. And Jared, why don't you tell us what you like for cash quarterbacks on DraftKings this week?
And so I settled on Jalen Hurts in my current cash game lineup. And I think, as always, there's lots of different directions you can go at quarterback in cash games. I think Sam Darnold is a cheap option if you want to go there. I just don't think you need that salary savings this week. So Jalen Hurts, I always like getting rushing quarterbacks, especially in cash, because it just kind of lays that floor with the rushing. Jalen Hurts last year in his 3 full games, he scored 13.6, 12.6, and 6.9 DraftKings points just with his rushing alone. He ended up topping 23 total points in all 3 of those outings. I like this Eagles-Falcons game. I think it has shootout potential, in a dome, 2 beatable defenses. So I like Hurts for $6,400 in cash games.
I certainly like Jalen Hurts as well, for all the reasons that you say. And I always start out looking at the cheap guys just because later in the season, I think it's going to become more important. But as you look down all the pricing lists this week, it's clear that you don't actually need savings as much as you normally do. I do think that Sam Darnold is still in play at that 5K range. He has upside this week, and he has attractive stacking options. Robbie Anderson is $400 cheaper than DJ Moore, but both of those guys are in range. Terrace Marshall is at the minimum price if we're looking to make tournament stacks out of these guys. And then obviously there's Christian McCaffrey to pay up with some of that money that you're saving. He's one of the few running backs that I think you can really stack with the quarterback. Mitch, what are you thinking for cash at quarterback this week?
Yeah, so listen, I'm from Rochester, just like you guys, right? I'm down here at DC plant now, but I am trying not to be biased, but it's very difficult. Josh Allen, man, I'm paying up just because of one of the reasons why Jared just said. Salary is abundant. You can get all sorts of value plays everywhere, all over all the positions. Wide receiver has a dozen of them between 3 and 4.5K that are viable options this week. And so I'm looking at a guy who has scored 29 or more in 8 games last season, scored 18 or less just 4 times. And even when he did so, he really didn't ruin you, or so to speak. We're talking 16, 15 points. Never really ran out there and scored 6-7 points. And he's only 7.4K to start off on DraftKings. We're getting him at a little bit of a discount to start the season off. And I get that it's against Pittsburgh, one of the teams that did give him some problems last year. But listen, it's week 1. Team is healthy for the most part. And this team looked dangerous in the preseason. And I don't see any reason for me personally not to be paying for Josh Allen in week 1.
Mitch, do you tend to set one cash lineup and then apply it everywhere, or do you usually go with multiple?
Yeah, Matt, just fully transparent. As now I've gone full-time pro life, I don't play cash games. I honestly have gone full GPPs. It's not that I can't identify them. My website has, ownership projections and all sorts of metrics and things. So I'm able to identify the players that I believe would be fine cash options if I were to be playing them. So that is probably worth mentioning as we are going through this podcast, that I will easily be able to identify whom I believe is a fine cash option, but my money's going to be tied up in tournaments, man.
Yeah, I got you. Well, let's jump to the tournament side and talk about what you like at quarterback first there.
Yeah, so I like actually what you had earlier mentioned with Sam Darnold. I think is a phenomenal play this week, and he looked great, and the team looked like they legitimately were testing him in that third preseason game. I think he threw the ball 26 times in 2 quarters of play. They wanted to see what they had there. They wanted to get that offense gelling. There's a lot of fine mid-tier priced options that I think will go overlooked this week because of all that value. Everyone's going to be doing studs and duds this week. And I think Sam Darnold actually leads you to a different type of lineup construction. You're able to stack Sam Darnold with Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore, both 5.7, 6.1K, while the rest of the industry says, use Terrace Marshall. He's 3K min price. Well, that also will lead to a higher ownership. And you can run it back on the other side and have Corey Davis at 5.8K. Again, we're focusing on that mid-tier of wide receivers while the rest of the industry is saying pay up, pay down, get Devontae Adams, get Marquez Callaway, grab Terrace Marshall. And we're saying, well, we're going to zig while you're all zagging. Give me those guys in the middle that no one's touching.
Yeah, I like that game a lot. I'm not sure I'll get to Darnold himself, but I like at least doing like mini stacks with like wide receivers on both sides of that game. So play Robbie Anderson with Corey Davis or DJ Moore with Elijah Moore in that game. I definitely like it. I think both defenses are bad. I like Ryan Tannehill for tournaments, $6,500 on DraftKings. I mean, he has been a high ceiling quarterback throughout his time in Tennessee. Just last year, he had 6 games of 26 plus DraftKings points. This Titans Cardinals game has the highest over under, or the second highest over under on the main slate. The Titans have the second highest implied total on the main slate at 27.5 points. Arizona's top 3 cornerbacks, Byron Murphy, Robert Alford, Marco Wilson. Murphy's okay. Robert Alford hasn't played since 2018. Marco Wilson's a 4th round rookie. I just don't think the Cardinals have a chance to slow down A.J. Brown and Julio Jones. The risk is that Derrick Henry does all the scoring, but that's a risk I'm willing to take in tournaments.
Yeah, we talked about it last year. A lot of times Ryan Tannehill and Derrick Henry do their scoring in the same games because it's just Tennessee scoring a bunch of points. Derrick Henry does a lot of second half scoring in games where Tennessee has jumped out to leads. Jared, who are you stacking primarily with Ryan Tannehill? Is it A.J. Brown or sub 7K Julio Jones?
Potentially both. If I'm picking one, it's A.J. Brown. I just think A.J. Brown is underpriced. Like, I think he's in play for cash at his price. So I like him for tournaments, even outside of Tannehill stacks. But if I'm using Tannehill, I'd consider using both Brown and Julio. And then I'd be running it back with the Cardinal, either DeAndre Hopkins or Rondell Moore, or even Chase Edmonds, I think, is in play at his price tag.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the whole game's got got this week's 3rd highest over/under. It should be an up-tempo matchup on both sides. There should be plenty of points scored for both teams. I also want to throw in Russell Wilson, DK Metcalf. The matchup got better for Metcalf with Xavier Rhodes being ruled out for the Colts. He's at 7,500, so we're talking about spending up 7K for Russell Wilson. So maybe, Mitch, that's that studs and duds thing. Do you think that that's going to be a higher owned stack with people playing 3K receivers and the like?
No, and that's probably worth mentioning too, Matt. You bring up a good point. I'm not entirely sure there's going to be uber chalk on anybody this week. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a big 26 team, 13 game slate. There's so many viable options. The pricing is extremely soft, as it always is in week 1. It allows the casuals to jump in, give it a shot, try it out, and enjoy it. And that's honestly what this is all for, right? We should be enjoying ourselves playing DFS. Not everybody has to be a pro. And when we're playing in these types of weeks where the pricing is as soft as it is, I don't think we're going to see any ownership to a level where we have to necessarily be concerned. I think you can be aware of the different types of guys who will be chalky, but even the chalky levels will be a lot less than what we'll see in week 4, week 5. So I'm okay with virtually anybody in any format this week to some extent, especially if we're talking tournaments. The only difference that I would make if you're entering small field tournaments versus large field tournaments is whom to use in each. If we're talking about an extremely volatile pick, you don't need to use that low price, extremely volatile guy in a tournament less than 100 people. If you're entering a massive tournament, go ahead, throw that dart. You're going to be fine.
Mm-hmm. Before we get away from the quarterbacks, Ozzy on YouTube wants to know whether anybody is worried about the Steelers defense against Josh Allen this week.
I mean, it's not an ideal matchup. I think that's priced in, though, at his DK price, like Mitch mentioned. I mean, Allen's cheaper than Kyler Murray this week, who I do think has the better matchup. And when you factor in salary, I think Allen makes plenty of sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and part of it for me too is if we're talking cash, I like the running ability. I like the red zone equity, and he's 300-yard bonus over there on DraftKings. I mean, he literally checks all the boxes for what I want for a cash game quarterback. And yeah, the matchup is not extremely appealing. But the price tag is, and the upside's there. And, for me personally, and maybe this is worth mentioning, if you're playing cash games, I'm a big proponent of playing very small 3 and 5 man leagues. I like head-to-heads, and in which case you're still worried to some extent about your scoring ceiling. You can't just go out there thinking floor, because you still have to beat, 60% or so of your head-to-head opponents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think especially this week, ceiling's more important because, like you said, Mitch, the pricing is so soft. I think you have to assume that it's going to take higher scores than usual to win this week.
Yeah, and I have seen others say, I believe it was Adam Levitan that pointed that out. You have to score about 240 to 260 to win GPPs this week. So plan for that ceiling, as the guys here are saying. Over to running back now, Jared. What do you like for cash?
I'll throw out Joe Mixon. I've been talking about all off season, but $6,200. I think he's the best touch per dollar value on the week 1 slate. I mean, Mixon averaged 19.8 carries, 4.3 targets in his 6 full games last year. I'm not going to say he's going to average more than that this season, but I mean, there's a chance because Gio Bernard is gone, who still has some passing game work last season. So I think with Mixon, he's a safe bet, especially with Joe Burrow in his first game coming off the multi-ligament knee injury. I think Mixon is a good bet for 20 plus touches. So at $6,200, he just makes a lot of sense. He's a nice floor playing cash.
Yeah, Minnesota normally a good defense, but they were terrible last year, and especially against the run, 30th in run defense DVOA. So we'll see where that goes this year. They added plenty to the defensive line, got some guys back healthy. So I certainly agree with the touch expectation for Mixon. And there are several guys, at least, I think, in that range where normally we like paying up for touch certainty at running back, but this week you can get touch certainty without paying up for it. Najee Harris is another guy who's basically the same price as Joe Mixon, looked very similar, I think, in terms of full season drafting. He's not going to be at $6,300 most of the year if Najee Harris gets the workload that we're all expecting him to get in Pittsburgh. So I think he's a good place to go for that touch certainty this week. And I think you can put both of those guys in lineups together. Mitch, what do you like for cash running back?
Yeah, I like quite a few of them this week, and I think partially it's just because of that soft price. I mean, Antonio Gibson, potentially 20, 25 touches. James Robinson just found himself back into that RB1 role. He has just 6.4K, 24.25 implied team total for the Jaguars is interesting to me. Gibson, not the greatest matchup against the Chargers, so you could go with James Robinson there if you'd like. Chris Carson, at Indy at 5.9K, likely a little bit better of a GPP option. Of course, CMC, the lock of the century for cash games in week 1. My goodness, at 9.5K, you're going to be paying 10.8, 11K here in a month if all goes well for Christian McCaffrey. So I'm going to eat that salary up right now. And, the 2 guys I'm probably paying up for on this slate would be Josh Allen and Christian McCaffrey in cash games. I liked what Jared said about Kyler Murray. I think he's another fine option. Again, I think there's a half dozen at each position where they're all viable options. I mean, even Dalvin Cook, but those types of guys, you're starting to look at trying to pick one player versus the other when they have very similar floor and ceiling combinations. So it's hard for me to sit here and say, I love Cook more than McCaffrey in tournaments, but I love McCaffrey more in cash games. I think they're all okay for everything, honestly, especially when we're talking about these elite backs. We're talking about the mid-tier, though. It's Antonio Gibson and James Robinson for me.
Mm-hmm. I think Mike Davis is another guy to actually consider in that range, 5,400. Nice matchup for him against Philly. They're starting off the season as home favorites. Wayne Gallman has not been around that long to soak up touches. Cordero Patterson is the number 2 running back on the depth chart right now. So I think that if you like Mike Davis heading into the season, you go ahead and bet on him at this low price and get some touches. Maybe it's more of a tournament thing because none of us has seen him or this Atlanta offense yet, but I think he's an option across formats here.
This is why I don't like week 1. There's too many good options.
Right.
I almost prefer Alvin Kamara over Christian McCaffrey for the $900 savings. That I might look stupid saying that in 3 days, but I just think Traquan Smith's out now too. Like there's no one for Winston to throw to besides Kamara and Callaway. So I think Kamara's going to soak up a lot of targets. I think Aaron Jones on the other side of the game at $6,800 is a good option. So there's just a ton of running backs that I think makes sense just from a volume perspective this week.
Mm-hmm. On the tourney side, and Mitch, I agree with you on Chris Carson, kind of fitting a little bit better here, just because I guess for a couple of reasons. There are so many guys to choose from, so it helps to sort a little bit. And his matchup isn't great. There's a chance that the Colts shut down the run game, but there's also a chance that Seattle's tempo is for real. We've heard all the reports about it, that they're going to run this up-tempo offense, and they run a bunch of plays, and they score some points. And if they score some points, Chris Carson's probably going to be involved in that. So I'm betting on him getting plenty of touches, similar to the conversation with Mixon and Najee Harris, maybe not quite to the same level, but he might be at the same level, because now all we have is Rashad Penny and some other dudes that you're going to hear from only occasionally.
Yeah, and I really like Chris Carson this week too, because a lot of people are going to look at Antonio Gibson, and they'll look at James Robinson, and they'll look at Mike Davis, and they'll say more comfortable. And then you look at Chris Carson, they say, Colts defense kind of scary. Darius Leonard just roaming the middle of the field. He's everywhere, right? So they want to use Chris Carson, although he has insane touchdown equity. The guy has had 6 receiving touchdowns over the last 2 years. So even if he doesn't get that red zone work on the ground, the guy's always a threat to catch one, run it in from 5-6 yards out. Potentially if this pace up offense of Seattle gives him 4 to 6 pass catching targets, you're building your floor and your ceiling both a little bit higher due to that receiving element. And on top of that, Chris Carson is one of those guys who I think is a threat for 10 to 12 touchdowns easily this year if he gets the workload that we think he'll get. And I really, really like Chris Carson in week 1 simply because of the discomfort that even I have when I'm talking about him right now over those other guys who are in better spots. And even when we're talking team totals and stuff too, right? Chris Carson had a 26-point implied team total, 4 more points than Antonio Gibson's a Washington football team. So, even Joe Mixon at 22.25 implied team total. So I just see these little price point pivots, and I see these spots where I'm looking at a guy who's maybe, 9 to 12% owned compared to Mixon at 15 to 18. And there are little margins of differential. They don't make a ton of difference on their own, but if you do a whole lineup full of them, it does add up.
Chris Carson's the guy that I always want to play because I like him and I like his opportunity, and I find a reason to talk myself out of playing him. And then he scores twice, and I'm like, I should have played Chris Carson.
But you have him on like all your best ball teams, so you're still happy.
That's right. Jared, what do you like here?
So again, I like Kamara. Mitch, what do you think Kamara is going to come in much lower owned than McCaffrey?
Yeah, I think that, we're going to see all these guys somewhere in between like 15 to 25%. Honestly, I don't think there'll be too much of a differential. Currently, we have CMC as the highest owned, of course. Both Kamara and Dalvin Cook are within 3 percentage points based on our current initial projections. So I'm not entirely sure it matters too much if you're using one in cash and one in tournaments. I don't think you need to differentiate that way. I think just whatever you think has the highest scoring potential, circling back to what you mentioned in the first part of the show, scoring ceiling is everything this week, especially in tournaments, and definitely matters in cash games this week, circling back to all the way what Adam Levitan was saying. Everything matters as far as scoring ceiling in week 1. So I'm there with both you guys. I like all of them, and I know that's not like groundbreaking analysis, but I also don't want to be up here fluffing things up and saying, no, this guy's a better play for cash and tournaments, but I don't believe that. I think these guys are all interchangeable across some of these things. I think Kamara potentially is the one guy I am maybe looking at a little bit more GBP leaning, but it's Alvin Kamara, man. And somebody's got to catch the ball, somebody's got to run the ball, and it looks like he's going to be doing both of those things. So.
Yeah, definitely just questions of, what that Saints offense will look like without Drew Brees for the first time in like 10 years. But again, I think Kamara could catch like 7, 8, 9 balls in this game. So I like him in GPPs. I mentioned Chase Edmonds. I like him, $4,600. Again, if you expect Arizona to be trailing, which, Vegas does, they're, 2.5, 3-point underdogs. I think that's going to be Chase Edmonds' time, getting a lot of work in the passing game. So I like him at that price tag. And then Trey Sermon for $4,500. We don't know how touches are going to be divvied between Sermon and Mostert. I think like both guys could run for 100 yards in this game. Like that's how dominant the Niners running game could be against the Lions. With positive game script, we could see like Garoppolo throw it 15 times and then run it like 40 times. And Sermon and Mostert could both hit. And Mostert's just like $1,000 more. So I would prefer Sermon just for the discount.
Chase Edmonds for me is the kind of guy that I'm casting away this week because I don't think that the ceiling's there for him, because he's not nearly as good a bet to score a touchdown as anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure how high that target ceiling goes with all of the guys that they now have on that offense.
That's fair. Yeah, the touchdown thing is a good point. I don't expect them to use him around the goal line. But again, if we think that's going to be a shootout, a fast-paced game, lots of plays, and for $4,600, man, I still think he could catch 4 or 5 passes pretty easily.
Why do that though when you can get Rondale Moore for $3,000?
Play them both.
All right, let's go back to the Saints. We talked about the situation for Alvin Kamara and switch over to wide receivers because for cash, I think you have to at least discuss Marquez Callaway at $3,400. We talk about the targets available. Marquez Callaway is the number one receiver for that team right now. We'll see exactly what that looks like this week. But as you guys mentioned earlier, Traquan Smith is now completely out of the week 1 picture. He's on IR for at least the short term. So it's an even better situation for Marquez Callaway in a spot where we expect the Saints to probably be trailing the Packers in this game and playing some catch up. It's tough for me, Mitch, to get away from Marquez Callaway at 3,400. And I probably don't even care how many other teams are playing him.
Yeah, and I mean, especially if we're talking cash games, just lock them in and go forward. 3.4K, and I think we're looking at a guy, whether they're efficient or not, he's probably looking at 8 to 10 targets. I mean, they literally just need somebody who can get down the field. He can do that, and I think that Jameis, if he's forced to throw the ball, playing from behind against Green Bay, which we potentially could see happen fairly quickly in this game, I think that Callaway could rack up all the targets, and all of that is also irrelevant to me. He's 3.4K. He's the number one wide receiver for a guy who's thrown 5,000 yards before. Plug him in cash and just don't overthink things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think a borderline must play in cash, and the only reason it's borderline is because there are so many good, cheap wide receiver plays this week. There's multiple guys at the minimum 3,000. Marvin Jones is like 3,600. T. Higgins is 4,700. But yeah, Callaway is my favorite among those cheap guys. Just as you guys have mentioned, the target projection we can give to him. I think he's a good player too. He buzzed throughout training camp. He had that blow up game in the second preseason week. Jameis Winston obviously trusts him. Both those touchdowns where he was, Kelly was covered, but Winston threw it to him anyways. So yeah, I think for the targets at 3,400, Callaway's a pretty easy cash play.
Mitch, anybody else you like in the cash conversation at White Up?
Yeah, actually, I love what Jared said there. I wanted to circle back to Trey Sermon. I thought that was a great call, by the way. Something I hadn't really thought of. Those second half carries, could be up with a big lead. So I really like that. The other one I wanted to mention there was T. Higgins, and you nailed that one too. 4.7K is a phenomenal price tag for T. Higgins. Massive upside and a very strong floor for a guy who, really came on last year. And I think that with Joe Burrow, under center in week 1, I think that could be a phenomenal play at 4.7. There's a lot of really good ones though, too. If we're talking, cash games, Terrace Marshall is a tough one to get away from at 3K as well. Although I think, as a third wide receiver, you often want to kind of keep those guys like him and Rondale Moore, more so for tournaments, but still the price does fit. So, you could do something where you lock in these guys that we're all kind of like debating, right? Dalvin Cook, Christian McCaffrey, maybe even Kamara, slam all 3 in at running back flex. And then you throw out Callaway. Then you're throwing out Rondale Moore, 3K, 3.6, Marvin Jones, 3.4, whatever he is. These guys, they all fit. And you're able to go with like super high volume at the 3 running back spots and then use these guys who potentially are looking at 6 to 8 targets, and they do have upside and they have a little bit of a floor just simply built in with the price. So it's a really interesting week. I think wide receiver is actually one spot I'm finding a very difficult spot of, targeting the mid-tier pricing, unless I'm stacking like I had done with Sam Darnold. It is really hard to look there and be like, I love DJ Moore at 6.1K. Unless they're involved in a stack. So I'm intrigued to see what you guys have to say.
Yeah, well, my lean so far in cash is actually to pay down a bit into that Joe Mixon, Najee Harris, Antonio Gibson range, and then go up to some higher ceiling wide receivers, even in cash. Like I mentioned AJ Brown at 7,100. I'm considering him in cash. I just think that's a good price for this matchup. Again, I think Tennessee's passing game is going to have a ton of success, and I want to build again some ceiling into my cash game lineups this week. I just the 3K wide receivers, I like them all, but I just think 2 or 3 of them are going to disappoint. Like a lot of them are rookies. They're in shaky passing games or whatever. I'd almost rather take the the volume at running back, even if it's a bit less, and take that savings and use it to pay up at wide receiver a bit.
One other guy at wideout that I want to throw out is Michael Pittman at $4,100, and it kind of transitions over to the tournament side more than cash because of all the options that we've mentioned to this point. But a similar situation to him for Callaway, not as extreme, but it sure looks like Michael Pittman's the number one wide receiver for these Colts, who do get their starting quarterback back. We don't have to bet on Carson Wentz to like Michael Pittman at 4,100, and probably at least as important is we can game stack him with all those Seattle guys that we like. If Chris Carson goes off, if Russell Wilson and any of his wideouts go off and are scoring points, then the Colts are going to be chasing and probably throwing the ball a little bit more than they might like to going in.
Yeah, I like Pittman for tournaments. I don't think I'd use him in cash. I have too many concerns with that Colts offense with all the preseason injuries they had. But I do like Pittman in tournaments, like you said, Matt, as a game stack with some of those Seahawks.
Mm-hmm. Mitch, what do you like for tournament wide receiver?
Yeah, I was going to say there's actually quite a few of those guys, below that mid tier. We're talking 5K and down that just look phenomenal this week. Laviska Shenault at 5K. It's really, really hard for me not to like him. Was one of my favorite targets before the preseason game started, and only made me feel more validated after we saw the way they tried to use him in the preseason. Paris Campbell is actually somebody I'm intrigued at. 3.7K, the speedster out there in Indy. If everyone's looking at Michael Pittman, give me Paris Campbell. Probably half the ownership. Although, we're talking 12 to 6% drop. It's not terribly important, but it does add up in the long run. Tyler Boyd, I really like. Jerry Jeudy at 4.8K against the Giants is someone I'm all over in tournaments. We're looking at T. Higgins and cash games 4-7. And I think Callaway and Higgins are probably plug and play cash game options. Jerry Jeudy is one of those guys I'm going out of my way to plug in tournaments this week. I really like his price tag at 4.8. And again, it's really tough after that to touch anybody between 5 to 7K for me. Everyone after that is just plug in the studs and just go.
Jared, you got any other?
Yeah, love the Jeudy call, just as like a pivot off of T. Higgins, who's going to be, 3 times as owned probably. I'm going to throw out one other cheap guy that I don't think anyone's going to play just because there's so many other options. Marquez Callaway, a guy who I'm high on season long. Everything out of Green Bay is, he's potentially in for a career. I think he's locked in as their number 2 wideout, and he's just a prototypical tournament play. Like, he is boom bust, and maybe he'll be more consistent this season, but I still think he has the weekly ceiling. He had 5 games of 17 plus DK points last season. The Saints' number 2 corner, Ken Crawley, is out, so I think that's a matchup upgrade for MVS. The Packers have the high implied total, so Marquez Callaway is probably going to be 1 or 2% owned in tournaments, and I do think he has 20-point upside.
I think you should save your 4 target wideouts for the FanDuel show.
I want to add one more, and it's just the Buffalo Bills fan in me. I'm super biased. Listen, if Emmanuel Sanders misses this game and there's just less of the pie that needs to be shared, Gabriel Davis at 3.4K, man, I will find a hard time not plugging him and Jeudy in a tournament lineup, especially like a single entry tournament where they both have that downfield long touchdown potential on any given snap. So just wanted to throw that one in there before we moved on.
Nice.
Can't help myself, Matt.
Yeah. Let's go to tight end now. And I think on the cash side, there's lots in that 4K range to work with. It's Kyle Pitts leading our dollars per point projections in the lineup generator on DraftSharks.com. Tough not to like his spot against the Eagles this week, especially if you expect him to be more wide receiver than tight end. TJ Hawkinson's in play at 4,900. I think once his target upside really starts kicking in, we're probably going to see him north of that number for most of the season. And then Tyler Conklin, Jared, I started this week not expecting to think about him much this week, but full practice is Thursday and Friday, $2,900 on DraftKings. He's the lead tight end for Minnesota. Bengals allowed the 6th most PPR points to the position last year. He's in play for me in all contest types here. I'm not saying I'm going to go to him primarily, but I definitely can't look away from Tyler Conklin.
Yeah, I think he's definitely in play if you're going, the punt tight end route. And I think a lot of weeks that makes sense. To me, this week, you don't need it, just as we've said, with the soft pricing. So it's going to be Kyle Pitts for me in cash at $4,400. I think it's very likely the cheapest you're going to see him all season. Good matchup against the Eagles, good game environment. Eagles safety Rodney McLeod is iffy for this game. That could be a matchup upgrade for Kyle Pitts. So, I didn't take much of him in season long, so I kind of want to get a piece just in case he, breaks out and is, instantly this stud tight end.
And the reason Rodney McLeod's iffy is because he's still coming off the ACL tear that ended last season. He spent almost all of camp on PUP. So even if he does play, he's not had a whole lot of work since then. So it's certainly an upside matchup. Mitch, what do you like here?
Yeah, so for both tournaments and cash games, Travis Kelce, I'm not gonna get too cute here, especially since kind of the route I've been going here is, I'm paying up at running back for cash and I'm paying down at wide receiver, and that was all by design because I wanted to make sure I could get Travis Kelce, a guy who had 22 or more points in 13 games last year. He had 98 or more receiving yards in 9 out of the last 11, scored a touchdown or more in 8 out of the last 11. Was on an absolute tear to close out the year. And it's not like any of that matters. It's Travis Kelce, Patrick Mahomes. That's going to happen here and there and more frequently than it won't happen. So I can invest my money into a guy who has both a floor and a slate winning ceiling at a very volatile position instead of putting my money into other guys who are at the 4K price range for a reason. Now, if we're talking like a very large field tournament, I love me some Noah Fant this week. I'm all about those price point pivots. Again, Kyle Pitts, I love him too. I'm going to have exposure. I'm not going to pretend like I'm not going to. But if you're somebody who's playing a single lineup weekly, there's some credence there to go a little, get a little spicy and use Noah Fant at 4.3K. Get that price point pivot in there and not sit there and eat somebody who's probably 15 to 18% chalk this week with Kyle Pitts. As Jared had mentioned, he's going to be one of the higher points per dollar plays at the position for most sites this week. So he's going to be quite chalky, I think.
Mm-hmm. I think Austin Hooper is in that mix in the similar price range as well, 4,100, I believe, on DraftKings this week. Upside to him versus the Chiefs. The Chiefs ranked right with the Bengals in terms of points allowed to the position last year. And we saw the Cleveland target tight ends quite a bit, 24% of Baker Mayfield's targets in that playoff loss. So upside to Austin Hooper there. He might be a little bit too similar to Tyler Conklin at 2,900 for me to really get to him this week, but he's in play if you're playing around with multiple lineups. Jared, what else you got here?
Yeah, Hooper was on my list, and I probably want him as part of a game stack with that game. I like both Eagles tight ends too. I still think Goddard and Ertz might finish in the top. Both of them might finish top 3 in that team in targets. Atlanta struggled covering most things last season. That includes tight ends. They allowed the 3rd most PPR points to tight ends last season. So Dallas Goedert 4,800. Kind of a pivot off of Kyle Pitts there. And Zach Ertz, down at 3,800, it feels kind of gross, but it sure sounds like he's going to be a big part of that offense still this season.
And the Falcons seem like they downgraded at safety over the offseason. So, yeah, it's certainly a matchup that's plenty worth attacking. Defense to wrap things up here. I think you have to start with Atlanta. It pops up at the top of the lineup generator for DK dollars per point because they're minimum priced. We've talked about all the good things that Jalen Hurts does for fantasy. Also in the last 5 games of last year, which included the second half that he played against Green Bay, he had 4 picks, 6 fumbles. So that's 2 turnovers per game, an 8% sack rate. That was down from what Carson Wentz had, but also behind only 3 other starters in the league last year. So plenty of sacks possible, turnovers possible. He could score points and still be a good matchup for the defense.
Yeah, Atlanta stuck out to me as like the stone minimum defense to target. If possible, I like getting up to the Bills at 2,500. They're 6.5 point home favorites. Mitch loves it. The Steelers surprisingly have the 6th lowest implied total on the main slate at just 21 points. But really, I just think the Bills are going to be playing with a lead in this game, and that's going to force a lot of passing from the Steelers, which is what we want in our fantasy defense. Is that gives us sack and interception potential.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so when I'm looking at these defenses, Falcons, I'm right there with you guys. Your projections are on point because I think that's a phenomenal play. It's really hard not to like them in both cash and tournaments. Again, the pricing is so soft that I think the ownership is going to be so flat that it doesn't matter where you use them. One defense I'm actually very intrigued to use in week 1 is the Jacksonville Jaguars. So 2 years ago, they were an elite defense. They just fell off the face of the earth last year. Mm-hmm. They were miserable. And I think they have potentially, to have a little bit of bounce back in week 1 here against Tyrod Taylor, who has had 1 career game with over 300 passing yards in 45 starts. How's the stat for you right there? I got another one for you. He's only ever thrown 2 or more touchdowns in 4 of those 45 starts. So you've already got a team that can't probably run the ball very well. And on top of that, they're not going to push the ball down the field very well. They don't really have the targets to do so either, and nor do they have a quarterback that could take advantage of that if they did. And now you're telling me you can get the Jags potentially playing from a lead with a nice, healthy team total, and now you've got the spread differential. So with defenses, often in tournaments, you're looking for a team with a decent spread. Why is that? Well, because the team that's trailing has to throw the ball, which increases the opportunity for turnovers and sacks. I like the Jags at 2.7K.
Nice. Got him down myself.
Yeah, you probably make a lot of money just starting defenses against the Texans this year.
That's going to do it for this week 1 DraftKings podcast. Head over to draftsharks.com. Now you can get more player recommendations. Check out the lineup generator to build your own lineups with the help of the DS projections and Fanshare ownership projections. Come Saturday morning, we're going to be facing off against each other in the Crown is Ass Challenge. Mitch, we'll talk to you offline about whether you're ready to jump in for this high stakes, not really high stakes, competition with me and Jared. But we'll show you who we're going to play in the lineups against each other in the post for this podcast. For more discussion of DFS and other formats, you can also join the free Draft Sharks Discord. For Mitch Carl, Jared Smola, and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Shaw saying thanks so much for swimming with us.